Hello, hello, hello. I am Dr. Andrea Greiner.
And I'm Katie Corbin.
Welcome to the Dreams to Dollars podcast, a podcast for entrepreneurs and professionals who are on their way to actualizing their dreams into reality.
Join us in this lighthearted and unique podcast where we talk about business, success, life, and building a deeper trust in God and the universe.
We are here to elevate the conversation and bring the magic to build your legacy.
We're excited for you to be here. Can't wait to dive in.
Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are so excited to have you here. And just to kick us off, I want to connect with each of you wherever you are, washing dishes, making a meal, sitting at your computer, kind of banging away, feeling super inspired, exercising, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for listening to this podcast. We really want it to be a place where you can come and sit with us and nod your head along with us and maybe even cry with us, hopefully, definitely laugh with us. And this one is a tender one. And so we want to bring this forward. You know, we always ask, what is going to contribute to the podcast of Dreams to Dollars? And our experience and your life experience is part of that, right? And so this is a little triggering topic of, spiritual fuckery in the coaching industry. And why is it important to have these conversations? And gosh, Katie and I talk about this a lot. I would say it's important because I've witnessed so many, pretty much every single one of my clients and myself included, invest into some type of program where there is some manipulation, some control, some weird power dynamics that have happened, or even false promises, right? Investing into something where to the extent of 15K to 30K. And there's a lot of false promises of what was going to be delivered. And we want to have this conversation, first of all, because I would say, gosh, Katie, I wish we had a statistic on this. Probably 99% of us have invested in something that was funky, right? We could just say funky. And let's normalize that. And actually, I think about this too, of pretty much all of the investments I might have labeled as bad actually created something above and beyond, just not what I had thought they were going to create. If I allowed them to create something better, they typically did. And so because I was willing to heal whatever wounds were there as well, something actually greater. I have one, so actually literally every single one. It was either the greatness could have been, wow, I'm so much more aware. Now I know how to invest better, with more of my awareness. Or, wow, I'm not going to do that again. That's a huge gift, knowing, like, the other one just recently, Katie and I were like, oh my God, thank God we're not with that person still. What a gift. That's a huge gift. So there's some layers here. Sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and maybe even your Kleenex if you need. And we're going to dive into this because I think it's a really important topic.
Yeah, and the reason why we're bringing this forward in we say in coaching, like obviously this can affect any areas of spirituality, but
Yeah.
spirituality tends to fall into self-development, which also tends to fall into the coaching realm, which is basically a big unregulated realm where the barrier of entry is nothing, right? You don't actually have to have any experience to be any type of coach. And we know that coming from regulated professions where there's a scope and there's training and there's, you get a certain level of education and you get a master's or a doctorate or a PhD or whatever it is. Sometimes when you enter into the field of an unregulated profession, there's pros and cons to regulation and unregulation, obviously, but the lines can start to get blurred. And it's true within the regulated profession, they also can get blurred. It doesn't mean that just because somebody is a doctor doesn't mean that they have deception and malicious intent, right? And really, the majority of people do not have ill intent for people. Sometimes it's just a naive nature. They were told to do something, they were taught a methodology, and then they're sharing it, right? They're sharing the way that they were taught. So this can kind of be trickled down. And then some people do when it comes to like the line of like actually becoming a cult leader. they often have disorders, and they
Yeah.
attract, and they pry on people's vulnerabilities and exploit people, and almost like a whole conversation in itself, and deceive and manipulate people to believe their think, right? And then we become a group think mentality. So the leader has the group think, and then the thinkers, right, they're not really thinking, but they're following that way. So I find that spirituality in general, right, especially new age spirituality, has a lot of this because the lines tend to be blurred, especially when
Yes.
we talk about like spiritual gurus or somebody that has this invocation of wisdom. They can actually be seen and put sort of on a pedestal, like they're going to know, they can tap into these unknown spaces, they're spiritually inclined, they have some special gifts. But the lines start to get blurred when people start to utilize that, as their advantage, and then start to exploit people or allow people to not think for themselves, not give criticism back to the leader. And that's where it becomes kind of messy, right? So I think that sometimes there's an intent there that starts to invoke. And then sometimes there's not really, I don't think, an intent, where people are also coming with a lot of trauma and they may be triggered in a group, right? And they might say, oh, that person is, they're deceptive and all these things. So we have to take into account that everybody's personality and opinions of things are going to be damn different. So somebody could go into a group
Mhm.
and be like, this is kind of culty, and maybe it's not. So we just want to bring this forward, talking about sort of this sort of fuckery that can happen when you're in groups, and when you're feeling sort of maybe like something's not right here, or there's these kind of dynamics where everybody has to think differently. You can't say that you don't agree with something, right? Like it's like you don't have your own voice anymore, and there's only like this vibe of like the one people, or the people that are running it, are these almighty kind of creators. And we
I'm
talk.
like, "Blah." I'm already just like, "Blah." I have
I
so much to
know.
say too. It's like,
And then your inner rebel comes
oh,
in, mine does
yeah.
anyways. And it's like, nope, not being a part of that group, because this is just too freaking weird for me. So it's true though. And sometimes these groups can actually create a hierarchy, right? So they can have like, somebody's at the top, and then they have these kind of minion people that are supposed to do these things that, it's really, it can get really sketchy and weird. And I've heard stories of
Oh,
things.
well, so I'm just gonna,
Yep.
I'm gonna interject here. We are not called experts. We are not psychologists, but we have probably watched a lot of things and we
Experience.
have had experience. And like one of the reasons that there are that hierarchy is that in order to keep people to stay, they need to be busy so that
Yes.
they're not actually thinking, which is kind of ironic because if you look at how our society is built, everyone's busy and like leisure time isn't really celebrated, because if you start to become leisure and start to have questions, then like you're going to shift things. So it's fascinating, that aspect. So keep going. I wanted to
It's
add that.
true, right? Because you were in a
Yeah.
spiritual
Yeah.
commune too, right? And then it
Yeah.
was like,
I know. I was like, wow, I was in, well, and I grew up Catholic, and there's a religion has its own um influence.
yes,
And then I was in a spiritual community for almost over 10 years, and similarly had its own influence of how you should be, how you should dress, how you have a relationship, I wouldn't call it a cult. However, there was definitely some fuckery going on. And really, well, this goes back to our podcast we just did on community. It was like, if you shined too bright, or you asked too many questions, or you were kind of like, like not
reprimanded.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it was funny when I left in 2019, and my middle guy was just about a year, because when I thought about it energetically, it was like I was living in a dark box. That's how it felt. And when I thought of leaving, I felt like I was a bird flying out of a cage and I was going to be free. And I was like, okay, well, that pretty much sums
It's
it
a
up
pretty
for
good
me.
metaphor.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
exactly. I was like, okay. And this community did get kind of criticized that it was a cult, and that one of the leaders was like, well, most cults you can't just leave.
Yeah.
And so when I did leave, I mean, I still have quite a few of the friends, not as close because I wasn't seeing them on a weekly basis. I look back at it from a place of like, it helped establish a certain type of foundation in my life, meditation and these different aspects, and it was very limiting and limited
Yeah.
in the what I knew was possible for my life, which was so much more than living. It was kind of like I wasn't willing to live by someone else's standards anymore. Um, and kind of, I'm not really a rules and regulations type of person. So it was like, and you kind of start to see the holes and the mistruths that appear there. And oh, interestingly, and then in 2020, I joined a different group that was more for my business, but did have some tendencies towards some manipulation, So that was not identified at first, but more towards how people acted in that spiritual entrepreneurial group. And there was this, people couldn't fully express themselves. They would actually reach out to me, and I was a newer member. They're like, hey, when's the call? Or they would like ask me for the link. And I'm like, why are they asking me? I'm like, I'm just here for like I'm brand new for a few months. And so some of these little things I started to be aware of. And I actually joined because of some false promises that were promised me of like fame and fortune and um getting out, really expanding my presence, and that actually did happen, not in the way that I was sort of promised. And again, similarly, it was something I invested in, and most days I am grateful for because of what happened within it. I met Katie there, and also like so many other colleagues now that are my soul sisters. And my business did grow in a way because I left. Actually, it grew in so many different ways. Um, it just not how we kind of think logically, when you join either a spiritual community or an entrepreneurial coaching program. And also, gosh, I would say Katie and I have spoken about this, but there was a time where I thought I wouldn't be okay if I had left. Like I would be ostracized or my business would fail. And I actually got the opportunity to work through all of that wounding in a confrontation. And I did a ton of tapping and like inner shadow work, and just really took responsibility for whatever might have been mine in this confrontation. And then I knew I was okay, and that I was going to be okay if I did get kicked out of this group. And that was huge to really be like, because I saw that like head on. It was like this image of like, I won't be okay if I get kicked out of this group. But it was like coming at me. And I had to be like, wait a second, really? Like, really? You're not going to be okay? And I looked at all the abandonment stuff and all the wounds. And then when I came through that, I actually became more of myself. And I stood out no matter what in this group. And I did what resonated with me, and not necessarily like I was told how I should run my business. I actually was like, I'm going to do it how I know is wants to thrive. And everything started to change. But what Katie said, why? I started thinking for myself.
Yeah.
And realizing even if I got kicked out, I would be okay. And I think those two things are huge when you find yourself stuck in either a community or something you're paying for.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes I think that it's like our own evolution too, as well. I'm not saying that cults are, we're not even calling that a cult or anything, right? There's such a line between like the sort of definition of a true cult and these sort of tendencies to like you were saying with the commune, saying that like you could leave, right? You could willingly leave, and that doesn't really fall underneath what we would consider a cult, right? And again, we're not saying we're cult experts, or we're not saying any psychological things. If you're actually you think you're involved in a cult, obviously seek help outside of this podcast.
Yes, please.
But
Yes.
but the truth is your free will is available, right? And when you start to feel like, I feel kind of deceived or manipulated in this space, and or the person that's facilitating, or the people that are facilitating this space, um we're all also human. It doesn't mean that, the leader doesn't make a mistake and apologize or anything like that, right? Like, we
Yeah.
all have humanness within us, and nobody is perfect. I know, like, even me, like, if I make a mistake, I'm being like, I'm sorry. I'm like, this is, if I recognize that I need to apologize or whatever it is, but we can
Well,
recognize the humanness.
actually, that is normal. But when you're
Right.
in these types of groups, if you try to bring something up and you're berated and you're ignored and you're like belittled, then that is actually a very big sign. Like Katie said, same thing, when someone brings something to me, I'm like, oh my gosh, let's look at this. Let's look at all sides of it. Let's have a conversation about it. I'm willing to kind of sit in the fire and the discomfort. And that's actually what you would not necessarily experience in some of these different groups.
Right. And it's easy sometimes, I think, on like groups when people are in person, right? You can sort of be whoever you want to be on social media. And then you could
Yeah.
go hide in your damn closet and be this like extroverted social media that has this really cool branding, and you're literally like crying in your closet, when you go home. So there's like this facade that can also happen where you see these people in a certain light, or you see a group or something you enter into as a like this spiritual kind of being, and then as you get closer to like look at it, you recognize like, something's weird here, or something's off. I always notice if there's like an incongruence. Now,
Yeah.
everybody's a little bit incongruent. It doesn't mean that, like, just because I'm been in business 15 years, I've had like every leap in my business has been wonderful. I've had setbacks and things, and all these, these areas where I had to work on and look at myself. It doesn't mean like I'm just this exuberant person because I've been in business for a while. Um, but the truth is that there's a difference between this sort of deceptive sort of nature of some of these groups where we are saying, oh, it's spiritual. It's, learn this new methodology. Here's how you attract your twin flame. Here's how you do this thing. And then you can't like question the methodology or the spirituality. Say, hey, this didn't work for me. Or, hey, doesn't feel
Yeah.
comfortable for me. Or, hey, this is kind of triggering for me. Whatever it is, like, if there's not a lot of ability to question that, you might want to question, like, should I
Well,
continue
and
this space?
I would add that if this person is the only source of that information,
Right.
because the truth is we are infinite beings and we're not operating in a world of guru and of superiority anymore. That's like dissolving. So when someone says, I am the only way that you can access this information, to me that's like ding 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 ding,
Yeah.
I am this specific channel for X, Y, and Z. To me, I'm like, really? I'm like, you can go to God and get all of that information.
Yeah.
Like there is not one person on this planet that has like privy over anything more than anyone else, right? So to me, I would add everything that you're saying, that inquiry, because that's, and I love Katie. We have these conversations all the time, right? I'm like, Katie, what do you think about this? And she goes down the rabbit hole, and I love what she finds. She's like the rabbit hole seeker, and it's like that to me is we are no longer in the place of this superiority. Like I have the answers now. Do we have experience? Yes. Does Katie have a 15-year, experience running a business? Yes. Do I have, over 10 years as a doctor and helping other clinicians improve their business and helping people access their gateways to healing? Yes. But you could find that other place, you can work with that with your connection with God too, right? So that I want to bring that forward because it can be a really useful when you start to experience that and
Yeah.
question
And
that part.
ultimately, it's like the question of what are you seeking it through? Because the
Yeah.
access is already there, and we could even say this is religious, this is spirituality, this is whatever. Like, what
Yeah.
are you seeking it through? Are you speaking it through like the word of it, or are you seeking it through somebody telling you, right, that this is the way or whatever? Now, the truth is, at the same time, a lot of these spiritual spaces, on the good, we'll talk about the good here, right? Like the spiritual spaces do help you find that connection for yourself,
Yeah.
do help you harness your
Yep.
intuitive gifts, do help you have clearer foresight into the future, do help you have a better connection with God. Even in a Christian group, you could say like, oh, reading the Bible is going to be a connection, right? A connector piece for
Yeah.
people. And maybe the religious person that is facilitating like us, a sermon is helping you connect. So here's the thing, the line can get really blurred on this. So it's important for
Yeah.
the way of like discerning what is this for you, and also doing a little bit of an investigation. When Andrea says rabbit hole, I usually say a little bit more of investigation
Yes.
measures where you're like, you're doing a little bit of research about the community that you're joining or the spirituality that you're getting into, where does it even feel right for you? Like, does it feel right for
Yeah.
you, or are you just seeking something outside of yourself to fill a void? So,
Yeah.
so just pay attention to that for yourself when you enter into it. And a lot of things are that. I mean, Andrew and I are very spiritual, right? We have spiritual beliefs. We have a strong faith and access to some of these, like, almost like I call them like the higher realms. But it doesn't mean that um it's almost like, if that feels good for you, that's not scary, right? Like that's not scary. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
you can't be intuitive or you can't do these things or anything like that. It's just there's good and bad in every freaking profession. And don't just think that because somebody's spiritual and they're throwing out these like terms and they have this sort of wisdom and access, that they're really, not a malignant narcissist or not
Yeah.
a, doesn't have ill intent. Like, do a little bit more research before you just sort of jump into these groups and going like, is this really conducive for my future? Or is this ultimately filling some kind of void in me? Because there's
Yeah.
if you're feeling a void, sometimes you actually get caught in weird stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah.
just
If you're
pay attention.
looking, I mean, that's true with relationships too, right? If you're looking to somebody else to fulfill you, then there's an imbalance. And a tool I really like that is so simple is to say truth before you ask your question of somebody. Truth. Is this person going to, or is this program, or is this community, or is this thing going to contribute to my life for what I really want to create in my business? Or not, and you'll get a sense when you can ask that, like it's inquiry. And then, just like Katie said, yes, the investigation, looking at uh all aspects of where they're showing up in their platforms. Does that message really resonate? You could even ask, is this a false promise? If someone is making you feel they inferior or superior, you might have some questions around that too, So inquiry is going to be one of your greatest assets in this. And then if you're already in it, knowing that either finding help to get out if it is a serious, obviously, again, we're not cult experts, but if you're in it in a paid program or other things, knowing that you can really also find support to move out of it. And no matter what is being told to you, you will thrive when you are out of it as well. There's thriving that can happen if you're feeling stuck in a paid program. So anything else? I mean, there's so much more that we could talk about in this topic. This is kind of the tip of the iceberg. I think really ending with knowing that, like, we've all probably made really interesting investments and found ourselves in perhaps feeling manipulated and controlled, or um and to just know that I think people feel a lot of shame in when they make those investments or they join communities or paid programs, and to know that, like, what if that is what helped you so much to do the next thing, and where can we see it as a gift and move out of it and find the help to move out of it, instead of just, like, shame wants you to stay there and in the darkness. But when we can bring shame to the table and say, wait a second, like, that was really weird and hard, but I also made one of the like, I just met one of my best friends, and I did create a program that was really successful, or, oh, this happened and this happened. And then the shame kind of like like melts because it can't exist when you bring it to the table. So that would be my hope for people listening to this, knowing how stuck I've felt in the past and maybe even alone and ashamed for making these investments. Katie and I have talked to hundreds of coaches that most have made some investment they're ashamed of, and to just like let's shake the shame and allow the transmutation of that to bring something else that is even greater. That's what I would kind of end with, that vision.
Yeah. So thanks for listening, guys, and we'll see you in the next podcast.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Dreams to Dollars podcast. If you vibe with our content and want to find out how to work with us, check out our show notes for the links.